the previous video in this series on creating a simple purchase order system using Blazor and C#, we added the page, the Razor page, to maintain tax rates, but we only got as far as adding tax rates. In this video, we'll add the facility to edit and delete records. I'll also show an example of the error CS026 that I got while doing some preliminary work on these videos and how to avoid it. Let's have a look at the code. Editing a tax rate will follow a similar pattern to adding, but with a few minor differences. The first difference is that the user will have to select a record from the data grid for editing, and if they don't choose a record before clicking the edit button, we will have to issue a warning, and we'll be using the same warning dialog that we used to order for duplicate tax item, but with a different message. Once a record has been selected, we must also determine the ID of the record and populate the Add Edit dialog with the data to be edited. The possibility still remains that a duplicate record could be created, and this must be prevented and the user warned. Now, before we tackle the tax page, we'll start by changing the SQL stored procedure for updating the tax record to prevent duplicates. So let's have a look at the SQL. We want to find the stored procedures, and it's tax update. So I'm going to open a new query, and I'm going to paste in some SQL that I've already got ready. And this will drop the existing update procedure and create a new one. These are the variables being passed in, and is going to check to see if there's already a tax record with a description the same as the one being passed in, and where the tax ID is not the same as the tax ID being passed in, i.e. a different record. And if it is, it's going to set the result value to 99. Otherwise, it's going to allow the update. So let's parse that and execute it. So that's changed the SQL stored procedure. We don't need to save that. And back in the code, we're going to need to change the tax service. So if we go to data, tax service, and this time it's tax update that we're going to need to change. So I'm going to delete the existing one and bring in a new one. That looks better. So it's going to be an integer. We're going to be passing in the tax description, the tax rate, the tax ID, and also tax is archived. Because we're going to be in an update, we might need to get to taxes archived for deleting a record. Then we pass in the parameters and return the variable called success, which will either be 0 if it's succeeded, or 99 if there's a failure. So that's tax service. We also need to change the interface, the iTax service, and let me just get rid of that line and bring in a new one. Just as an aside, I've noticed that the C# code generator from Alan Simpson puts in this underscore in a tax get one. I've been sorely tempted to change that, but I've decided to leave it just as it is. It'll avoid other errors creeping in if I forget to change it in one place. So that's the tax service. So I'll save that. And now we can go back to the tax raiser pages. And the first thing we need to do is to change the grid events. At the moment, we've got an on toolbar click, but we need to replace that so that we also handle a row select. So let's bring that in there, and we'll see that the grid events has now got row selected, and it uses a row select handler as well as the toolbar click handler. So we need to bring in a procedure to do that. So I'm going to scroll down to the end of the code and bring in this item here. And so the row select handler is going to find out the tax ID and allocate it to this variable called selected tax ID, which we haven't declared yet. So we'll need to go back and declare that. So that it's an integer, and that will hold the ID of the selected row that we've got. The next thing we need to do is to change the toolbar handler so that if the user clicks edit, it goes off and does something. So under the code for editing, what we need in here is this. So first of all, it checks that a tax rate has been selected. And if a tax rate has not been selected, i.e. it's 0, it's going to call up that warning dialog that we had before, and it's going to have the header is going to say warning, and the content is please select tax rate from the grid. Otherwise, if it's not 0, it's going to open the dialog add edit tax, and it's going to put a header text in saying edit a tax rate, and it's going to populate the add edit tax object with the tax object from using the tax get one for the selected tax ID. I hope that makes sense. We also need to change the tax save method so that that's handled correctly. So on the tax save, we're going to need to have something in here where we're handling if it's being edited rather than added. And we'll bring that in here. So what that's doing is it's going to call the tax service tax update, and it's going to get allocated the integer of success, either 0 or 99. If it's 99, the tax rate already exists, so we're going to open the warning dialog saying this tax description already exists, it can't be added again. Otherwise, it's going to hide the dialog for editing the tax rate. It's going to have status changed, and it'll set the add edit tax to a clean refreshed item, and selected tax ID is being set to 0 as well. That should be it. So let's have a go. first thing I'm going to try and do is click edit without selecting an item. And it says, please select a tax rate from the grid. So that's working fine. I'm going to edit exempt, and I'm just going to change the tax rate on there to, let's say, 0.05, 5%. So that works. And now I'm going to attempt to edit that one and call it exempt. And it shouldn't allow it. And it doesn't. So it then says this tax description already exists. It cannot be added again. So I'll cancel that. So that seems to be about that. For editing, that seems to work. Delete, of course, does nothing. So that's the next thing to tackle. Now, as we've previously mentioned, we won't actually be deleting records from the SQL tables, but rather marking them as archived. To delete a record, we'll be checking that the user has selected a row from the grid, and if they have, we will then display a new dialog showing the details of the selected item. Now, I have considered trying to use this add edit dialog to also handle the delete, but I found that in order to do this, I was making this a lot more complicated than it is at the moment, with various if statements as to whether to display the existing data or to show nothing, and that caused me immense problems. I've therefore decided on a pragmatic level just to add a new dialog to the form and abandon, possibly for the moment, any idea of a reusable component for asking for confirmation of deletion. We need to add some code immediately below the warning here. Actually, I think I'll probably have it above. We would need to enter a new dialog. It's going to be largely the same as this. And we can see that it's called dialog delete, and it's going to have a header saying confirm delete. It's going to have two text boxes. This time they're not going to be enabled, so the user won't be able to change any data. They'll only be able to look at it. I'm going to have some additional text that says please confirm that you want to delete this record, and then I've got two buttons, one saying delete and one saying cancel, that will call different procedures. So I guess the first thing we need to do is declare that variable. So we may as well put that under here. And add the code in the toolbar click handler for the delete option. So here's the toolbar handler. Here's the delete. So the code goes there. I've duplicated that. Let's get rid of that. So what this is doing is if the user fails to select a record from the grid, selected tax ID is going to be 0. So again, we'll issue a warning saying please select a tax rate from the grid and open the dialog. Otherwise, we're going to populate the add edit tax object with the selected tax IDs data. The header text on the box is going to be delete tax rate, and then we're going to call the dialog delete tax show. So that's going to show the dialog. We've got two new on-click events, so we need to add those. And just to make life simple, we'll add them at the bottom. So we've got two items here. The no is the simpler. It just hides the dialog and resets the tax ID to 0. If, on the other hand, the user confirms that they want to delete it, it calls the update tax service, which will return an integer which we're calling success. Because we're deleting a record, we should never actually create a duplicate. So if success is not 0, we're going to issue a warning saying unknown error has occurred, the record has not been deleted, and then open the dialog warning message. Otherwise, it's going to delete, hide the dialog. It's going to refresh the tax list, change the add edit tax object to a new one to refresh it, and set the selected tax ID to 0. That should be it. Let's give it a let's give it a go. Right, let's have a look. So if I click delete without selecting one, it says please select one from the grid. If I select one and click delete, it's coming up with the dialog box saying confirm delete. Please confirm that you want to delete this record. It's showing me the one that I'm about to delete, but I can't enter any data there. I can cancel it, in which case nothing happens, or I can click delete. It removes it and updates the grid. This raises an interesting problem now. I can't remember which one that was. It was exempt. If I try to add one and call it exempt, I'm going to get the warning message that this tax description already exists. It can't be added again. Now, in real life, that might be a problem. There's no reason why, if something's been deleted, it might not happen again. You might not need to add the record again. In these circumstances, we're preventing that. And we haven't got any method of reactivating old tax rates. So maybe we need to just rethink slightly the stored procedure for dealing with this, and make a change to say that if we're inserting, we're going to check that the item isn't archived already. So let's close that and go to the stored procedure. And we're looking for the stored procedure for tax insert. We can just select modify here. And what we're looking for here is we can change this. So it says where tax description is the same as the tax description, and where it's a live item, i.e. tax is archived, is equal to 0. So we can just add in here, and tax is archived equal to 0. And we can also have the similar situation. Let's run that. So that's changed that one. But we can also have the similar situation, unusual, but we could have tax update, where we're trying to update an existing tax record to the same description as an archived one, and it would prevent that. We may want that to actually happen. So if we go through the same procedure here, so we're going to check where the tax description is the same as the tax description being passed in, and the tax ID is not the same, but that we're actually trying to update, and tax is archived equal to 0. Right, let's close that, go back to the code, and we'll run it. Last time, you remember, I couldn't add one called exempt. Let's try adding exempt again. That's fine. So it now allows us to have 2 records with the same name, one live, and, well, as many as you like that have been archived. That pretty much finishes what I want to have in this particular video, but I will just remind you about the warning about having a Blazor page with the same name as a model name. Let's close these and I'll illustrate the point. I'll close the tax page as well. If I rename that, I didn't want to display it. If I rename that just tax, and then open it, you'll see we've got a lot of errors. And this is what had me absolutely confused for ages. And it was only by sheer luck that I realized in the end what the problem was. If we look back at SQL, you'll see that I originally was using the UK tax called VAT, and by convention I always have VAT in upper characters, all of it in upper characters. When I created the C# code from the code generator, it gave the initial letter for the model as a capital V, but then had lowercase a and t, and it worked. I then couldn't understand when I changed it from VAT to this new table I've called tax, why the problem occurred. And again, I can illustrate that. If I close that and just rename that uppercase tax, as if it would, and that's how I had it originally with VAT, you'll see that it's fine. Now, I couldn't find any reference to this at all. So if you run into that error that I warned you about, it's CS, I think it's 0266. That is the cause. But if we change that back, I want to call it back, change it back to tax page. No. The problem doesn't exist. Strange. Fine. Okay. Well, that's it for this video. The next ones will be product and supplier. They will be using exactly the same pattern that we've used for this one, so life should be a lot simpler. Thank you. I'll put a link in the description to my website that will give a step-by-step guide through the process we've been following and the full code. Thank you very much for watching.